Here is the translation of the story. 6 years ago, faced with a choice between Betty and my future, I chose my future and went abroad to study. 6 years later, I returned with my degree, and Betty confessed her love to me, claiming she had waited faithfully for all those 6 years. I helped her secure her claim to the White family inheritance, only to overhear her telling her sisters, "The days of pretending to be deeply in love are truly insufferable. Once I marry him, he'll be responsible for making money for the both of us, and I'll take Tim to travel the world." The young man in her arms smiled brilliantly. Someone reminded her, "Aren't you afraid he'll turn on you? We're getting married tomorrow. His family cares so much about their reputation, would he let himself become damaged goods?" I sneered. 6 years ago, I could abandon you for my career. It is the same now. I was at the Y Pavilion, the best private club in Hong Kong, treating the heir of a traditional Chinese medicine family to dinner, hoping to recruit him for my laboratory. A cacophony of noise drifted in from outside. "The ceremony is complete. Send the eldest sister and brother-in-law to the bridal chamber." Quiche. Quiche. No. Drink the cross-cupped wine first. Y Pavilion was the top choice for high society heiresses precisely because of its privacy and security. As long as things didn't get too outrageous, the owners here would cover for them. If it were any other day, I would have filed a complaint for disturbing my guests. But thinking that I, too, was getting married tomorrow, I found myself unexpectedly infected by the joy outside. Actually, didn't I want to go a little crazy too? To ride horses across the grasslands with my bride, white veil dancing in the wind, living free and wild. That had been my grand declaration during university. But in just 10 years, I was about to become a perfectly regulation-compliant son-in-law of a wealthy family. The wedding guests were all connections of the bride's and groom's families, or business partners. The entire wedding process was a carefully choreographed performance witnessed by the media. My guest said he needed to take a call and stepped out onto the terrace next to the private room. Bored while waiting, I curiously pushed the door open a crack to peek outside. Among the crowd surrounding two people kissing, I spotted Betty instantly. After the kiss, the noisy group flooded into a private room. I was marrying Betty tomorrow. I didn't want any misunderstandings or doubts before the wedding. Worried I might have mistaken the person, I instinctively ran out of my room. That private room had a dedicated waiter outside. I gave him a tip, and he made an excuse to go to the restroom, leaving his post for a moment. I pushed the door slightly ajar and looked through the crack. I recognized everyone inside. They were all wealthy heiresses friendly with Betty. I also got a clear look at the man sitting next to Betty, the one she had just kissed. I knew this man. I had seen him a few times. When I attended gatherings with Betty, he had suddenly appeared twice, introduced as the young master of the Ito family from H City. Back then, I felt his gaze on me was unfriendly, but I didn't pay it much mind. I just thought that a beautiful, wealthy heiress was bound to have a few admirers. The atmosphere in the room was heated. Everyone was getting carried away, completely unaware of me, the voyeur at the door. Someone tried to curry favor. "We prepared a bridal chamber upstairs for you and Tim today. If you don't go back tonight, Richard won't have an issue with it, right? He's definitely in his lab right now. Whether I go back or not, he won't know." Betty reached out and pulled Tim into her arms. "The groom's procession isn't until tomorrow evening. We have plenty of time." Tim lowered his head, appearing somewhat shy. Betty gently lifted Tim's chin. "Are you satisfied now? You married me before Richard did." Someone asked unhurriedly, "Aren't you afraid Richard will flip out if he finds out?" Betty raised an eyebrow. "I'm not afraid even if he knows. Aside from the fact that his family can't afford to lose face, given my grandmother's obsession with reputation, she would naturally step in to help me keep him. What's wrong with having a husband who earns money for me? As long as I eat well, drink well, and have fun with the person I like, that's enough. I've given so much for you, you can't let me down," she added to Tim. The implication was that he was suffering a great grievance by willing to be her secret lover. I have always been a steady person, but hearing these facts, I felt dazed. When I returned to my private room, my face was pale. My guest looked concerned. "Are you ill? Should we reschedule?" I can drive you back." I thanked him and said, "I just want to be alone for a while right now." The guest took his leave. When I was the only one left in the room, I couldn't stop my eyes from reddening. I thought 6 years of waiting was enough to prove a person's true feelings. I didn't expect it to be a complete and utter scam. Betty and I were childhood sweethearts. Our parents were friends, and we played together from a young age. When we reached school age, we both attended Hong Kong's most famous noble school, Johnston Academy. Unlike many wealthy young ladies, her personality was gentle and introverted. Arguments among classmates were inevitable, and many heiresses were snobbish, some even bullying their peers. Betty was gentle and kind to everyone. Even if someone bullied her, as long as it wasn't too excessive, she would just laugh it off. Her mother, Mrs. White, was very strict. Children who caused trouble outside were punished, and repeat offenders were completely cut off. Mrs. White had 3 husbands and a total of 8 children. She didn't favor sons over daughters. Everyone had a chance to become the heir. These children knew very well that they enjoyed a life superior to ordinary people and possessed privileges only because they won the birth lottery and had a good mom. Without this mother, they were nothing. So the children were completely obedient to her. Among the White children, Betty wasn't considered particularly smart, but her face was outstanding. Her features were beautiful, her temperament clear and pure. Talent scouts had once handed her business cards. Betty had dreams of being a star, but the grand matriarch, old Mrs. White, hated the entertainment industry. So Betty could only fantasize about it and dared not mention a word at home. I once asked her, "Do you have any dreams?" Betty smiled at me. "You are my dream." My heart felt sweet. Actually, I didn't have grand ambitions either. A house, a warm meal, and a woman who loved me were enough. My family ran a pharmaceutical factory. I studied pharmacy in university while she, with her average grades, stayed in Hong Kong for college. We were thousands of miles apart, but we spoke on the phone several times a day, sharing funny stories from our lives. Every weekend, she would travel all the way to see me. We walked hand in hand through every street and alley, kissing secretly behind the school flower beds. We promised to marry as soon as we graduated. But in my junior year, 2 things happened that forcibly changed the trajectory of my life. First, the financial crisis brought my family's pharmaceutical company to the brink of bankruptcy. Although my brother tried to turn the tide, his spirit was willing but his strength was insufficient. My father hoped I could become a pillar for the family. To refine my expertise and build more connections, I applied to Harvard Medical School. Through hard work, I was successfully admitted. Second, Betty's father was exposed by paparazzi for an affair with a model. Betty's mother, finding it shameful, divorced him and soon married her 3rd husband. Her father, devastated, left his son and daughter behind and went abroad. From then on, Betty and her younger brother became unloved children. To pledge loyalty to her mother, Betty stayed in Hong Kong after graduation and entered the hotel business owned by the White family. 4 years of long-distance relationships were torment enough. I didn't know how many years I would be gone, and thinking of the heavy burden on my shoulders, I dared not delay her any longer. So I proposed a breakup. "I'll wait for you. I'll wait for you." Betty took my hand, this usually elegant woman crying like a helpless child. I told her that since we were born into privilege, we naturally had a mission to shoulder the family's prosperity. We couldn't live only in our own world of love. I couldn't bear to be too harsh, so I said, "If we are fated, we will be together eventually." At that time, I made a secret vow in my heart that I would fight with all my might to carve out a world for myself and for Betty. Harvard gathered the world's top medical talent. In my 6 years abroad, I studied day and night, forgetting to eat and sleep, daring not to slack off for even a moment. Later, I pursued my doctorate, established my own laboratory, and achieved some remarkable accomplishments in the medical field. When I returned to China, I saw Betty in the crowd picking me up. With red eyes, she said, "I've been waiting for you. Do you still want me?" Back in the private room at the club, I sent a text message. Within 5 minutes, someone pushed the door open. The person who entered was a young lady who often hung out with Betty. Her family's company survived entirely on scraps of business leaked from Betty's fingers, so she kissed up to Betty daily. Recently, through Betty's introduction, she had taken on a medium-sized project from my family's company. Naturally, she dared not offend me. I had asked her to come quietly to the side room, and she had no choice but to obey. I asked bluntly, what exactly is the relationship between that Tim and Betty? The young lady looked troubled. I threatened her. This matter will be exposed sooner or later. If you tell the truth, I naturally won't throw you under the bus. But if you choose to cover for her, whether you can continue to hang around Betty will depend on a single sentence from me. She stammered and told the truth. That boy had known Betty since he was 18. They had been together for 10 years. Betty knew that finding a boy from an ordinary family meant being abandoned by her family, so they could only date in secret. She had been constantly looking for a wealthy heir who could assist her. However, her abilities were average, and she had a father with a terrible reputation. The truly powerful prominent families in Hong Kong would never let their sons marry her. She tried to fish for several capable young masters, but none took the bait. While waiting, she waited until I came back. After finishing, the young lady was a bit scared. Mr. Johnston, you aren't going to call off the wedding, are you? You're getting married tomorrow. I waved my hand, signaling her to leave. Whatever decision I made had nothing to do with her. Pale-faced, she scurried away. Betty was right about one thing. If I backed out of the wedding tomorrow, the ones who would suffer might be me and the Johnston family. I didn't have concrete evidence of her infidelity. If I called off the wedding and embarrassed the White family, old Mrs. White would surely attack me. The Johnston family had just gotten back on track thanks to my father and brother's desperate efforts. We couldn't afford to offend the White family yet. I asked the waiter to bring me a glass of strong liquor. One gulp burned my throat severely. The alcohol didn't make me dizzy, instead. It made my mind clearer. I felt like the victim of a romance scam, utterly defeated. Someone else had invested nothing, yet I was so moved I was willing to give everything. To be precise, after the college entrance exams, it was destined that our lives were trains heading in two different directions. She understood this clearly in her heart, yet I foolishly wallowed in guilt. My family had been in business for 3 generations. Growing up listening to my father talk about the deception and trickery in the business world, I always harbored some suspicion and distance toward those who actively approached me. Only Betty. I had never doubted her deep affection. Momentary affection can be faked, but a 10-year friendship? She managed to fake that with ease. Perhaps it was from watching too many tragic dramas about waiting for a lover. After getting back together with her, whenever I thought of the countless cold, lonely nights she spent missing me and enduring solitude, I would feel a heart-aching guilt. So I spared no effort to help her. Betty told me her greatest hope was to be valued by her grandmother. Mrs. White had married 3 times and had 7 or 8 children. Such a large brood was not looked upon favorably by old Mrs. White. The old madam cared about inheriting family traditions, not the quantity of offspring. None of Betty's mother's generation could carry the torch currently. All affairs in the White family were decided by the old madam. The results I achieved in my overseas lab helped my family make a beautiful turnaround. My Johnston family could have fully absorbed these fruits, but to help Betty gain favor with old Mrs. White, I took my nearly completed pharmaceutical research results and requested a meeting with the old madam. The White family started in real estate. The regulations on real estate 3 years ago had shrunk the White family's assets significantly, and old Mrs. White was trying to invest in other industries. The pharmaceutical industry had the best prospects. The conditions I offered made old Mrs. White beam with joy. She understood clearly that I, a pharmaceutical researcher, was the core of the enterprise's development. If I became the White family's grandson-in-law, the White family's investment in pharmaceuticals would have a solid anchor. I didn't like management, nor did I like socializing. I only liked burying my head in the lab with my beakers and bottles. But for Betty, I suppressed my dislikes, trying hard to chat and laugh in the business world, pulling resources and making connections for her. Thinking of this, my heart twisted in pain. My efforts to love her, in her eyes, just made me a clown who was being manipulated and enjoying it. Still a bit unwilling to give up, I called Betty. She answered. It was quiet on her end. I held my breath. Betty, I'm not feeling well. I want to see you now. I'm working overtime. Her tone carried a helpless, don't make a fuss vibe. You know, I've always wanted to become strong so I can be your safe haven. Finally, she comforted me, rest early. I'll come to pick you up tomorrow afternoon. As she hurriedly hung up the phone, my last shred of hope was extinguished. After thinking it over, I found a number in my phone that hadn't been dialed in years. When I heard the ringtone, my heart leaped to my throat. After 5 or 6 rings, the call connected. A cool and steady female voice sounded. Are you calling for rescue or for love? I was blunt. Rescue. Arriving along with the requested suit was Betty's iron buddy, Tim. I saw him in the mirror, looking hesitant and worried. I greeted him, a rare guest. Tim himself had no background, but he had excellent grades and was loyal. Because of their close personal relationship and the deep trust placed in him, he was now the vice president of the investment department at White Corporation. He held multiple roles, doing the daily work of a VP, acting as Betty's private secretary handling miscellaneous tasks, and serving as a spy to monitor Betty's rivals. He was an excellent strategist, he just followed a leader who couldn't be helped. After a pause, Tim asked tentatively, if something unexpected happened to Betty today and she couldn't make it to the wedding venue, could you? I pushed away the makeup artist's hand and immediately pressed him. What accident? Which hospital is she at? I'll go there now. Knowing he couldn't hide it, Tim stammered. Betty's phone has been unreachable since this morning. I'm worried. Then call the police immediately. Tim looked troubled. If they really called the police, the fact that Betty was with that man yesterday couldn't be hidden. He also couldn't predict if I would swallow the reality of a threesome relationship if I found out about her other boyfriend. He understood even more clearly that if this marriage was ruined, Betty's future in the White Corporation would be gone. Tim squeezed out a smile. Recently, Miss White has been very dedicated to her work. She was busy meeting a client this morning. I was just worried a sudden change might affect the wedding. When the ceremony began, Betty had not arrived. When the banquet began, Betty still had not arrived. Old Mrs. White was so angry she nearly vomited blood, ordering the White family to search the entire city. I stood by, comforting her. Grandma, don't be angry. Betty will come back. At 8 p.m., Hong Kong entertainment media broke the news. Betty had run away from the wedding with her boyfriend of 10 years. Debt collectors had come for the boyfriend, and both were beaten and injured. Hashtag Johnston family heir abandoned at wedding hashtag. Hashtag Betty and male model boyfriend in 10-year romance hashtag. Hashtag rich family tears apart star-crossed lovers hashtag. Within an hour, these topics hit the trending search list. When Betty stumbled in, the guests attending the banquet had all left. Some knew a scandal had broken out and left to avoid involvement. Others were busy and didn't want to waste time since the bride wasn't there. Betty apologized incessantly to old Mrs. White. She said to me, "Don't believe those rumors outside. I didn't run away. I just saw a boy being kidnapped and acted as a good Samaritan." I took out my phone. Are the photos taken by the media also forged? Among them was a photo of her kissing Tim at the club last night. Her face went pale with urgency. That was just for show, just playing around. I questioned her sternly. Last night I wasn't feeling well and called you to come see me. You said you were working overtime. Is this how you work overtime? Although my parents and brother strongly promoted this alliance, their original intention was still for my happiness. Moreover, if Betty could do something this absurd on such an important occasion as a wedding, such a daughter-in-law couldn't be entrusted with anything significant. My father patted my shoulder lightly to soothe my emotions, then said to old Mrs. White, "Let the marriage between the 2 children end here." The White Corporation's investment in the pharmaceutical industry had just gotten on track. They absolutely couldn't lose me, the backbone. Old Mrs. White quickly offered compensation. "Richard, if you can forgive Betty, I will give you 50% of the shares in White Pharmaceuticals." This meant that for all future returns on the White family's pharmaceutical investments, I would take half. My brother sneered. The White family's main business was still real estate and hotel investment. Pharmaceutical investments only accounted for 1/10 of their assets. Furthermore, this 50% would nail me to the White family, forcing me to serve them tirelessly. And as my wife, Betty would share this 50%. The money wouldn't flow out of the family at all. I pretended not to understand the calculations behind it. I squeezed out 2 tears of sorrow. Grandma White, is my affection worth so little respect? My voice trembled, like an accusation following grief. My Johnston family's status isn't low, nor do we need to cling to anyone to survive. I buried myself in the lab all these years to prove I have value, that I'm not some fragile vase raised by a wealthy family. What I cannot accept the most is having my feelings ignored and being treated merely as a tool for profit. Betty came over, trying to take my hand, attempting to move me with that gentleness again. Richard, please believe in my love for you. I threw off her hand. Do you remember your promise to me? You said I was the white moonlight of your life, that you waited for me all these years and never had a change of heart. It was because you waited for me regardless of everything else that I was moved and willing to give everything for you. I looked down at her. I want one honest sentence from you. Confirm that you and Tim have been nothing but ordinary friends from beginning to end, that you never dated, never had any improper behavior, and will absolutely never have any involvement with him in the future. If you can confirm this, our marriage continues. If you dare lie to me again, I will never let it go. Betty opened her mouth, but immediately hesitated. The answer was already obvious. I called to my parents and brother. Let's go. After returning home, I took a hot bath and lay comfortably on my bed. When I woke up the next day, the rumors about Betty hadn't been suppressed. Instead, H Entertainment ran a special column on her scandals. It revealed Betty had chased the second son of the Chun jewelry family. The second son, a Cambridge graduate, hadn't even looked at the mediocre Miss White. The column attached the love texts Betty sent him, claiming she had never loved anyone before but fell for him at first sight. Next was the eldest son of the toy tycoon, the Kong family. He was the heir. Betty had courted him too. H Entertainment released a video of her confession. Betty told him, I thought I would never fall in love with anyone in this life. After seeing you, that thought vanished. Netizens gave Betty the nickname Sister Who Never Loved. The video of Betty and Tim holding a wedding ceremony at the club was also released. The internet exploded. Holding a wedding ceremony with another man the day before her actual wedding? Does she want to be a bride every night? They say first come, first served. Is Mr. Ito the husband? Or is the Johnston heir the concubine? Waking up in a great mood, I groomed myself and headed to the lab. I had already signed the contract for this project with the White family, so I would finish it. That was my professional ethics. Besides, money is money, no matter whose it is. My colleagues at the lab were worried I couldn't handle the blow and would be depressed for a while. My beaming face truly surprised them. A colleague gave me a thumbs up. I finally understand why our mentor in college said to take you as a role model. No difficulty can stop you from doing research. I didn't check my phone while working. At lunch, I found 10 missed calls and dozens of texts. Almost all were from Betty. Only one text belonged to that woman. She told me to work with peace of mind, said it wasn't convenient to eat now, but wanted to have a meal with me once things blew over. 3 days later, a famous movie king was exposed dating an 18-year-old trainee who had just debuted. It immediately diverted the attention of the gossip-hungry masses, and the heat around Betty's absurdities died down. The White family couldn't afford to offend H Entertainment, so they could only use other hot topics to suppress the news. Betty came to the lab to find me. Just like before, she didn't disturb me, just waited silently. She waited until I finished the tasks at hand and walked out of the lab before she approached with a smile. Can we talk? She asked gently. I used to like this gentleness of hers, thinking she was emotionally stable. Being with her gave me an inexplicable sense of security. But now, such gentleness only felt like hypocrisy to me. I nodded and took her to the break room. The break room only had a small 3-seater sofa, a coffee table, and plain bottled water. Betty didn't seem accustomed to discussing matters in such a shabby place, so she suggested, "I saw a new restaurant opened across the street. It's open all day." I looked at my watch. It was 2 p.m. I had indeed missed lunch. I had absolutely no desire to dine with her, so I said with slight impatience, "Just say what you have to say. You know I cherish my time and dislike wasting it on idle people and matters." Her eyes instantly turned red with regret. "Richard, it was my fault. I didn't tell you the truth. I did pursue other boys, but I didn't truly like them. It was just a way to vent my boredom." Her voice carried a sob. "I'm a normal woman. I get lonely, I get sad, and I hope to have someone by my side. But in the end, we didn't end up together. That doesn't count as betraying our feelings, does it? As for Tim, I shouldn't have lied that he was just a friend. I knew Tim very early on. At first, we were just ordinary friends. During the years you were away from Hong Kong, many things happened in my family. Especially 2 years ago, when my eldest sister married the young master of the Zhuang family, my grandmother gave her the hotel business, the second largest in the company. I had been in the hotel management company since graduation. I worked so hard, yet I was silently kicked out by my eldest sister. My efforts all those years were wasted. I protested to Grandma, but she scolded me, saying if I had the ability, I should find a powerful grandson-in-law too. When I was most upset, Tim stayed by my side. I didn't think much of it then and muddled into a relationship with him. I don't love him, but I couldn't bear to drive him away, so I kept him around and sometimes introduced him to money-making opportunities. Because of my father, I already have no face in this circle. Speaking of this, she suddenly reached out and hugged my arm, crying, "Richard, only you have never despised me." She was playing the emotional card, trying to gloss over the Tim issue. I pushed her away forcefully and looked down at her. Taking a deep breath, I said decisively, "I was willing to be with you not because of who you are, Betty, but because of that declaration of deep love, that you were always waiting for me." I was very moved then, even guilty, so I worked ceaselessly to repay your devoted waiting. But when I discovered your devotion had been given to many people, that emotion and guilt vanished. I sneered, "Betty, what do you want me to love you for? Love your fickleness? Love your wandering eyes? Or love how you occasionally indulge in passionate affairs?" She turned pale at my choking words, holding back the tears in her eyes. She thought for a moment and said, "Our families uniting helps the family businesses too. It's a win-win. If I were really in it for profit, your second sister is a much more suitable marriage partner than you. She's a high-achieving Harvard graduate. She and I would be a power couple. Why would I look for you, the unfavored one? Probably because I described her as worthless." Betty frowned. "You know what? I hate this condescending attitude of yours the most. The reason I can't let go of Tim is that he is gentle. No matter what I say, he quietly stays by my side, supporting me, agreeing with me." I said unhurriedly, "Then go marry him." She wanted a strong partner to hold up the sky for her, but also one who was gentle as water and centered entirely around her. Where in the world is there such a cheap bargain? I knew my words were harsh, but I hoped she would realize the difficulty and retreat, never to interact with me again. Betty stood up, furious. "Except for me, no wealthy heiress in Hong Kong would like a stiff, hard man like you. I wasn't born to please anyone. I am who I am. When I was busy, I lived in an apartment not far from the lab." Entering the complex, at the entrance of the building, I saw a familiar figure. Although we hadn't met in 3 years, as long as she stood there, even if I couldn't see her face clearly, I could sense that familiar aura. I froze. She strolled out from the shade of the trees. The warm yellow light slowly revealed her face, making my heart race with nervousness. She walked up to me, looking like a child who had done something wrong. "I was happy to know you broke up, but afraid you'd be snatched away by another woman again, so I came." I invited her. "Come up and sit for a while, Lillian." There was Sealy fruit juice in the fridge. I poured some for her. Lillian was a bit surprised. "I didn't expect you to still like drinking this." Many people couldn't get used to the taste of Sealy. The first time she bought it for me, I drank it and vomited. Later, thinking it was healthy, I started drinking it again. The more I drank, the more I liked it. Just like some people. I thought I didn't like the taste, but who knew that once I drank it, I'd get addicted. It hasn't changed all these years. After saying this, the look in my eyes as I turned to her was tinged with red. Almost at the same moment, we reached out and hugged each other tightly. I choked up, "I'm sorry. I didn't choose to believe you back then. I don't blame you. Perhaps because of the twists and turns, our feelings seem even more precious." Lillian and I were alumni of a university. I was in the medical school, she was in the School of Finance. We met at a fellow townsman gathering. Students from Hong Kong were very united, and since most came from wealthy families, we gathered often. It was obvious to everyone that Lillian liked me, but her family background was flawed. 40 years ago, the casinos in Hong Kong and H-City were almost all owned by her family. Lillian's grandfather was once a triad leader, later arrested and imprisoned for multiple crimes. Since then, the Lin family had kept a low profile, almost disappearing from public view. Although the Lin family had immense wealth, orthodox wealthy families didn't want to deal with them, assuming they were crooked and that associating with them would bring bad luck. By Lillian's generation, the family was doing legitimate business, and the grandchildren were all top graduates from prestigious schools, but they were still criticized by many rich clans and tycoons. When she first confessed to me, I avoided her like the plague. That happened just as Betty came to confess to me. Happy in my heart and also to make Lillian give up sooner, I started a passionate relationship with Betty. I would take Betty to the townsman gatherings and introduce her as my girlfriend. But since I was thousands of miles away from Betty, there was more longing than passionate love. While studying, I was a bit oblivious to my health. My chest ached dully, but I didn't pay it any mind. I endured it for 2 days, then fainted in the cafeteria. It was Lillian who took me to the hospital. The pain made me curl up into a ball. I couldn't even walk. She took the examination forms, supported me running up and down stairs, and handled all the procedures. The diagnosis was gallstones requiring surgery. With trembling hands, I called Betty, wanting her to come and keep me company. Betty said she was following her mother to inspect a project. She had always wanted to please her mother, so I could only say through tears, "Then you go be busy." My parents were both abroad and couldn't make it back. Lillian signed the family consent form, claiming to be my fiancé. She was the one who guarded the operating room door. Post-surgery, she took care of me without leaving my side. Especially the way she carefully fed me porridge. I was moved. Lillian smiled and said, "Your girlfriend isn't competent at all. You should dump her quickly." During my recovery, she took care of me with meticulous detail. Even the uncle in the next bed praised her. "You're lucky you found a good wife." Betty came to the school to see me a month later. Knowing I had gallstone surgery a while back, she only offered a few words of comfort. I was a bit disappointed but understood. For the next half year, Betty visited less frequently, while Lillian used the excuse of taking care of me and demanding I repay the favor to meet me and treat me to meals. At one gathering, we both got slightly tipsy, and she kissed me. That time, I didn't refuse. After kissing me, she said, "Be with me. I will give you everything I can give." Her confession moved me. However, the next day, after sobering up, my rationality returned, and I felt guilty towards Betty. To avoid Lillian's relentless pursuit and not wanting to face the guilt of seeing Betty, I went with my mentor to a medical summit. When I returned, I heard about Lillian cheating a male classmate. The post was hot for 2 days before being taken down. Everyone knew Lillian used her connections to suppress it. I was surprised Lillian didn't seem like that kind of person. I wanted to find that boy to ask about the situation, but classmates told me that fearing Lillian's retaliation, the boy had left school and was being protected. I vaguely remembered the boy's nickname was Tim, from the university's dance academy. Later, a boy from the dance academy dating my senior mentioned this Tim. He said the boy was quite handsome but wasn't focused on his studies, only wanting to find a rich second-generation heir. That boy had even shown me Tim's photo. So when I saw Tim that day, I only felt he looked familiar. Later, I remembered. Everyone said Tim liked to climb the social ladder, so it was normal for him to latch onto Lillian. He just caused a scene because he was unwilling to be dumped without getting benefits. This matter created a knot in my heart. I was pure about love. Although I hadn't agreed to be Lillian's boyfriend, I couldn't accept that she was entangled with another boy while pursuing me. Betty started visiting me more often, but every time she came, she seemed a bit distracted. I asked her about it, but she said it was work matters bothering her. Betty's absent-minded state made it hard for me to speak up, to completely free myself from these complex emotions. When my father suggested I go abroad for further studies, I agreed. I didn't expect that after half a year of effort, I would successfully get into Harvard Medical School, a place top medical talents worldwide aspired to. 3 years ago, I met Lillian at a Chinese gathering in Boston. She had changed a lot, so beautiful I almost didn't recognize her, thinking she was some big star. She explained what happened back then, saying she was framed. At that time, my mind was entirely on the lab. I didn't want to gamble on a woman's sincerity and fidelity, so I just responded perfunctorily, "Oh." Watching her retreating figure, my heart felt unexpectedly desolate. Later, I received a text from her saying to contact her if I needed help. I replied jokingly, "I'm a medical student. What can you help me with?" She replied, "Rescue or love." I leaned on the sofa all night while Lillian chattered beside me all night. First, she talked about how she punished Betty that day. Her people saw Betty and Tim holding hands, about to get into a car in the underground garage. Her people went over and, using debt collection as an excuse, quickly took Tim into a vehicle. They didn't drive very fast, leading Betty, who chased them all the way, to the outskirts of the city. Then they locked the pair in the car. After keeping them there for a while, they let the prepared reporters go up to rescue them, snapping photos furiously. As she spoke, Lillian seemed to vent years of grievances. Her family's Entertainment never needed to look at anyone's expression when reporting news, so when old Mrs. White personally came out to ask them to pull Betty's scandal, they ignored her completely. Next, she talked about her circumstances over the years. Many people jokingly called her the mob princess, a title she rejected. That was my grandfather's generation's business, and forced by circumstances. All these years, I've been trying hard to prove that I am also an excellent business talent. She had invested in many technology industries over the years, especially in artificial intelligence. I teased her with a smile. "I never thought you were crooked." Lillian suddenly held my hand. "In front of you, I don't want to be a proper, upright person." Her face reddened. "Proper people need to show restraint, but I don't want to." She leaned in to kiss me but was stopped by me. "I'm not ready to start another relationship yet." She nodded apologetically and sat back on the sofa. "I'll wait for you." Perhaps because my attitude was too firm, old Mrs. White personally came out and invited me for tea. She said earnestly, "Richard, among all the potential grandsons-in-law, I favor you the most. You are bound to achieve great things in the future, and that girl Betty will just be your foil." She painted quite a big picture. The implication was that as long as I was willing to return, it was very likely that because of my excellence, Betty would secure the position of heir, and given her ability, she would have no choice but to obey me. I smiled faintly, showing disdain. Love for me is the icing on the cake, not tolerating an incompetent and philandering wife for a lifetime just for money. And when you said you favored me the most just now, that was a false proposition. Old Mrs. White looked displeased. This was the first time I had contradicted her so bluntly. I added, "I will seriously complete the project invested by the White family. This is my professional integrity." I asked Grandma White to understand me and not let Betty disturb my work process. The person responsible for this project from the White family was Betty. If not for me, she wouldn't have been able to lead such an important project. It was time for her to step aside. Secondly, I didn't want to see her constantly due to work relations. Old Mrs. White thought for a moment and nodded. The White family and I were finally even. For the next period, I kept my head buried in the lab. Since we were in the final stages, I also wanted to hand over the results quickly. Betty didn't appear in front of me again. News about her came from my gossip-loving colleague. Betty was completely marginalized by old Mrs. White. She originally had no outstanding talent, acted frivolously, and was unfit for important responsibilities. She could only receive fixed living expenses from the family trust as a child of the White family. But Betty didn't stay with Tim either, because that day, my colleague went to deliver the new project progress report and encountered Tim making a scene at the company entrance. My female colleague laughed. What a fool. The White family's status isn't something he can climb into. Old Mrs. White will agree, I said. Betty is already a discarded pawn. Her only use is to preserve some reputation for the White family and add offspring to the clan. Old Mrs. White will make this happen. Perhaps I had defended Betty too much before, so even after being separated for 3 months, she still fantasized that I had feelings for her. One night 3 months later, I received a text from Betty saying she was registering her marriage with Tim tomorrow. But as long as I was still willing to love her, she would return to my side regardless of everything. I didn't know if the monthly allowance from the White family wasn't enough, to the point she couldn't even care about love anymore. Or perhaps old Mrs. White ordered her not to return to Hong Kong or appear before the Hong Kong media, causing her to lose the praise and entourage she once had, leaving her lost. I deleted Betty's contact information. From then on, we went our separate ways. After my project with the White family ended, Lillian proposed formally dating me. I refused. I said, my personality isn't suitable for dating, only for working hard. It's better if we stay friends. She was a bit frustrated, her eyes instantly reddening, but she quickly recovered her calm.
Richard, I'm hurt.
I smiled and comforted her. Everyone grows while getting hurt. You are excellent, you will find a suitable, good husband. Under her disappointed and sorrowful gaze, I got into my car. She wouldn't know that I had gone to find Tim before, asking about that incident back in university. My personality is like this, I get to the bottom of things. This is also one of the reasons I can do research well. I used the leverage of helping push things along for him to successfully marry into the White family. Tim said he met Lillian at a dinner party right after starting university. He came from a poor background but was good-looking, and his dream was to find a rich girlfriend and jump social classes. Lillian didn't love him, but she spent money to package him. It was Lillian who told him to approach Betty, not to drive a wedge between Betty and me, but to stay by her side and spy on the White family. Him exposing Lillian on the university network back then was just a play directed and acted by Lillian herself, allowing him to pledge loyalty to Betty. Facts proved he was smart and tolerant enough. Not only could he help Betty keep a capable boyfriend, but he was also willing to be the man behind her back. Tim solemnly reminded me, someone who can navigate investments with ease will never hold just one investment. I was stupid, it took me a long time to see clearly. I smiled bitterly. Yes,